Have you ever wondered, if the end of the world were to come, would you be saved? If fire rained down, the ground split open, and angels came knocking on your door in the middle of the night, would you be taken away like Lot? And if you were, are you certain it would be because you deserve it? Lot's story is a sacred paradox. He was not an enemy of God, yet he also wasn't a bold witness among the crowds. He didn't build altars, didn't make covenants, and didn't leave Sodom while it was still safe. He lived in the darkness, kept silent, bargained with his conscience. He wasn't like Abraham, who dared to leave everything behind to walk with God, who pleaded for a wicked city with deep compassion. And yet, on that blazing night, it was Lot who was pulled out of the city, though he hesitated, though he delayed. Though the angels had to take him by the hand and drag him away from what he couldn't let go of, he lived, while those who seemed stronger, wiser, more confident were consumed by fire. The book of Genesis records briefly that the Lord had mercy on him, but the book of Jubilees goes further. For the Lord remembered Abraham, so he brought Lot out from the midst of the destruction. Jubilees 19:8. Not because Lot prayed, not because he was righteous, but because God remembered. Remembered the covenant, remembered a promise made to someone else, and that's the chilling truth. Someone can be saved, not because of themselves, but because someone else lived rightly. Are you living rightly? Perhaps someone in your life, your child, your spouse, a fallen friend, is being preserved, not because they are worthy, but because you're still keeping the flame. You might be the one God remembers on the day of someone else's judgment. Or the reverse. Are you sure you're being protected because someone before you lived rightly? And if the covenant really works this way, where do you stand in the eyes of God? We grow up picturing Lot as a righteous man living in a sinful city. A good man, good enough to be saved, even though surrounded by evil. A man who still kept the faith, and so was pulled out of the fire. But in truth, Scripture never actually says that. In Genesis, God sends two angels to the city. Lot welcomes them. The crowd turns violent. The angels rescue him. But why? The answer feels vague. The Lord had mercy on him. Is that enough? No. Jubilees is clearer, chillingly so. For the Lord remembered Abraham, so he brought Lot out from the midst of the destruction. Jubilees 19:8. Which means it wasn't because Lot asked, not because Lot deserved, but because of Abraham. God remembered his covenant with one man, and from that divine memory, another man was saved. Lot wasn't the center of salvation. Abraham was. Lot survived, not through merit, but through the light radiating from another life. That detail is lost in most modern readings. But Jubilees restores it and shows us a sacred principle few dare to voice. The covenant may be operating beyond human moral reasoning. We're used to thinking the good are rewarded, the bad are punished. But in truth, many are saved because someone stood between them and wrath. Just as Abraham stood between God and Sodom, Moses stood between God and Israel, Jesus stands between sin and our souls. And sometimes we are the ones living like Lot, not truly righteous, not truly worthy, just someone being spared because God remembers someone else who once interceded for us. So the question is not, am I good enough, but rather, Am I willing to live like Abraham so that someone might be saved even if they're not worthy yet? Because when God acts, He doesn't look at how brightly each person shines. He remembers the covenant, and the covenant never dies. Humans forget, history fades, feelings cool, but God is different. He does not forget. He never forgets, especially not what He has promised in His covenant. The covenant is not a contract. It's not, if you do this, then I'll do that. The covenant is a living bond, a commitment that transcends time. It doesn't need to be spoken again, because it lives in God's eternal memory. The Book of Jubilees calls this covenant the eternal ordinance between heaven and earth. Jubilees 14:20. And in that very covenant, Abraham is not only the recipient of promises, he is the one who engraved his name into God's holy memory through a life of faithfulness. He didn't just believe, he walked. Didn't just hear, but obeyed. Didn't just build an altar, but taught his descendants to walk in God's ways long before any stone tablets were given. That's the deeper reason why God remembered Abraham on the night Sodom burned. Not out of emotion, not because of kinship, but as a sacred activation of a signed covenant. And from that memory, Lot, the undeserving one, the hesitant one, the one nearly swallowed by compromise, was pulled out of the fire. Lot did not build altars, did not teach his children the law. He was not Abraham, but he was saved because Abraham still lived in God's memory. And that memory was stronger than fire, more enduring than destruction, deeper than any man's failure. This changes how we understand salvation. You might be living rightly, but haven't seen the fruit. You might be praying for loved ones, and they remain lost. Don't give up. God doesn't act when we want, but He remembers. And if you live within the covenant, the light from your life can reach someone on the edge of collapse. Someone will be pulled out of darkness, not because they deserve it, but because God remembered you. Because a true covenant never dies, and our God is the one who does not forget. We tend to oversimplify biblical characters. Either they're righteous or they're sinful. Either they're Abraham, who believes and obeys without delay, or they're the people of Sodom, proud, blasphemous, defiant toward God. But Lot stands in between. He didn't worship idols, but he didn't worship like Abraham. He didn't side with the wicked, but he didn't dare separate from them. He welcomed angels, but immediately after, offered his daughters in their place. Lot is the embodiment of compromise. When the angels said, "Hurry, the city will be destroyed," he delayed. When told to flee to the mountains, he asked to stay in a smaller town. When rescued from death, his wife looked back, and when he survived, he hid in a cave, trembling, without prayer, without faith's fire, filled only with fear. Measured by actions, Lot barely differed from those who were burned. But God sent angels, not one, but two. Not to judge him, but to pull him out. Not because he cried out, but because God remembered Abraham. Because the covenant does not measure by narrow moral standards, but flows like a sacred current beneath all generations. Jubilees does not praise Lot. In fact, it remains solemnly silent about his life. But that very silence makes the contrast clear. Lot was not saved because he lived rightly, but because he lived near the light of someone who did. That realization is sobering. How many of us are living like Lot, not denying God, but not walking like Abraham, not opposing him, but compromising, not rejecting angels, but not fully following the call. The story of Lot is not for us to judge others, but to examine ourselves. If today God saved us from disaster, would it be because of us, or because of someone else he remembered? And if we are truly grateful for that, then it's time to stop hesitating. Stand up, walk forward, live like someone worthy of the prayer that has shielded us all these years. When people read Scripture, many imagine angels as emotional messengers, arriving suddenly, rescuing the helpless, punishing the wicked, comforting the broken-hearted. But according to Jubilees, angels don't operate this way. They are not swayed by emotion. They don't come to rescue just in time. They don't improvise under pressure. They execute commands on the day, at the hour, on schedule. Jubilees reveals a holy and terrifying reality. In heaven, there is a sacred calendar, and everything on earth happens according to it. There is no just a little late or we'll deal with it eventually. When the moment comes, events unfold like a clock striking the hour. Not early, not late. And the angels are not just messengers. They are rememberers, record keepers, guardians of a divine schedule set at the beginning of creation. They don't act on emotion, but on the memory of God inscribed in the heavenly tablets. Lot was pulled out of Sodom, not because he cried for help just in time, but because on the appointed day written in the sacred calendar, the covenant with Abraham required fulfillment. The angels were sent, not to show pity, but to enforce. The ancient promise became a present command, and the angels moved, not with trembling hands, not in haste, but with the certainty of a verdict long written. That's why Jubilees constantly emphasizes dates. Which year of the Jubilee cycle, which month, which day. Because God does not act on impulse. He governs time, and angels are the keepers of heaven's clock. We may delay, but heaven does not. If one day an angel comes knocking, not because you're better than anyone, but because today is the appointed time, would you be ready? Lot hesitated, but the angel still pulled him out, not because he deserved, but because the covenant had decreed, on this day that man must be pulled from the fire. And if you are living in the light, remember, a sacred calendar awaits for your obedience to become a living memory in heaven. On that day, the promise will be fulfilled, and the angel will be sent. There's a truth we rarely dare to face. Your life does not only affect you. Every quiet choice you make, living rightly, keeping the covenant, being faithful in the small things, might be the very reason someone else is saved. Not because they deserve it, but because you lived according to the promise. Abraham never directly prayed for Lot. He didn't ask God to spare his nephew. He simply pleaded, "What if there are 10 righteous?" But there weren't. The city was judged, and Lot, the one stuck in compromise, was still pulled out. Why? Jubilees answers, the Lord remembered Abraham, and because of him he brought Lot out from the midst of the destruction. That means one person living rightly can open the door of salvation for another. No need for a crowd, no need for the majority, just one who keeps the law, one who walks in the covenant, one who builds an altar where no one worships. And when the time comes, that memory awakens in God as a living command. I have promised, and I do not forget. The angels are sent not to reward the righteous, but to keep the promise made to one who lived rightly. This makes us wonder, if you are living in a city of depravity, in a chaotic family, among a lost generation, could it be that someone is being preserved simply because you are still praying? Maybe they don't believe yet, haven't awakened yet, but they haven't been consumed because you're still keeping the fire alive. You don't see the results. That's okay. The covenant doesn't demand immediate results. It demands faithfulness. And one day, perhaps without warning, an angel will be sent, and the one you love will be pulled from the fire because the Lord remembered you. Do not underestimate the power of your private life. In the eyes of heaven, one person living righteously can become the foundation for an entire generation. You may think that time is a murky stream and sacred memory is just a vague metaphor. But according to the Book of Jubilees, reality doesn't operate that way. In heaven, there is a structure, a system that records every action, every promise, every step. No gesture of yours is forgotten. No prayer vanishes into the void. Everything is recorded, and those who record it are the angels. Jubilees doesn't describe angels as glowing figures fluttering through the sky with emotional messages. Rather, they are heaven's scribes, the guardians of destiny, the sacred witnesses of the covenant. When Abraham built an altar, when he kept the Sabbath, when he taught his descendants to distinguish between clean and unclean, angels recorded it all. So when the time came, the fated day of Sodom, it was not a sudden event. It was the fulfillment of a scheduled plan, a sacred cycle that had been carefully watched over, not early, not late, exactly on time. The Book of Jubilees tells us that God established sacred time markers, 7-year cycles, Jubilee years, Sabbaths, and appointed feasts. Every judgment, every grace, every major act in salvation history happens on the exact day it was recorded. This completely reshapes our understanding of destiny. We do not live in a random universe. We live in a reality where everything is remembered, every step is stored, and every promise is triggered at its appointed time. You think what you're doing for God is small, invisible, unseen, but the angels are writing it down, and in that sacred archive, you may not see the result today, but the date of fulfillment has already been marked. A quiet act today may be the reason someone is saved 30 years from now. Because in the realm ruled by God, nothing is forgotten, only waiting for its time. Many think of the covenant as a reward, a blessing given to those who are good enough, obedient enough, holy enough. But if you read Scripture closely, especially the Book of Jubilees, you'll discover a different truth. The covenant is not for the perfect. It is for those willing to step into a living bond, to walk in faithfulness, even when they are not yet whole. Lot is living proof of that. He was saved, not because he kept the covenant. He didn't build altars. He didn't teach his children to honor the holy day. He left no legacy of faith. Throughout the story, we see him compromise, hesitate, ask for delay, live in fear, and finally hide in a cave, carrying only the memories of a city in flames and a broken family. Lot was pulled out of the fire because God remembered Abraham. That means he survived because of a covenant he never entered, never kept, never passed on. And the painful truth is, he was saved from Sodom, but could not save the fruit of his own life. His wife was turned into a pillar of salt. His daughters, shaped by distorted morality, gave rise to two nations, Moab and Ammon, lifelong enemies of Israel. The covenant worked, but Lot didn't live in the fullness of its blessing. Like someone rescued from a war zone, but bringing out no legacy. Like someone pulled from a burning house, with only singed clothes, while behind him, home, family, and memories turned to ashes. God kept his word, but Lot failed to keep his part. And that forces us to ask, am I living in the covenant, or merely surviving under the light of someone else's covenant with God? If I am saved today, am I losing the fruit of what I was meant to carry? The covenant is not a reward hanging above us, waiting for the best person to claim it. It is a living bond, and if you step into it, it can save you, sustain you, and connect you to a sacred history. But if you only stand near it, without living in it, you may be pulled from the fire, but enter a cave with no legacy to leave behind. In human storytelling, mercy often appears as a surprise. A king changes his mind at the last minute. A father softens when seeing his child suffer. A powerful one forgives the weak. But God is not a character in our emotional scripts. His mercy is not an exception. It is order. The Book of Jubilees shows this clearly. From the beginning, God established a sacred calendar where everything is not only created but appointed, a time to be forgiven, to be rescued, to be restored. He doesn't suddenly save someone. He doesn't change his mind out of nowhere. Everything has been written within the light of the covenant. Lot was pulled out of Sodom not because he moved God emotionally, not because he begged passionately. He hesitated, delayed, requested exceptions. And yet, God saved him, not out of sudden pity, but because the time had come for the covenant to be fulfilled. And in that covenant, mercy is not an interruption of justice. It is a fixed rhythm of heaven's law. It is an essential part of divine order, set aside for those who walk with God, and sometimes even for those who simply live near the light without realizing it. We often fear God's justice as if it's cold and harsh, and hope for mercy like a lucky escape at the last minute. But in the covenant, justice and mercy are not in conflict. They are two branches of the same river. The Book of Jubilees doesn't depict a God of emotion, but a God of eternal memory, perfect plans, and a heart that never forgets the faithful. If you are living righteously but haven't seen the results, don't assume God has ignored you. Maybe you haven't seen the promise fulfilled because mercy is being kept for its appointed time. It is not late. It is not forgotten. It flows quietly like a hidden river until the day it breaks through. And when that day comes, you will realize what seemed random had already been written. Have you ever thought you don't matter? That your righteous living, your faithfulness, your prayers don't change anything? That your prayer is just a faint whisper in the vast silence? But what if you closed your eyes and imagined someone being saved only because you're still living rightly? Abraham didn't live near Sodom. He didn't see Lot every day, didn't supervise him, didn't manage his life. But Abraham lived in the covenant, and he interceded, not just for Lot, but for the whole city. He said to God, "If there are 10 righteous people, and God listened. The result: the city was destroyed. But Lot, though never named in the prayer, was still saved. The Book of Jubilees declares, God remembered Abraham, and because of him, Lot was pulled from destruction, not because Lot deserved it, but because one man lived rightly and was remembered by God. Are you living rightly? Maybe you don't see the results. Your loved ones are still distant. Your child hasn't believed yet. Your spouse hasn't changed. But the covenant doesn't follow human timelines. It works like a seed, quietly sown, germinating in the dark, and in its season, it breaks the earth and rises. You may be Abraham and not know it. The light from your life may be holding someone back from total collapse. Someone who seems lost, but hasn't fallen completely because you're still standing. Don't stop living rightly. Don't stop praying. Don't let the silence fool you into thinking God has forgotten. He is remembering. Remembering every time you chose what was right in secret. Remembering every time you walked in uncertainty and still followed the light. And on the appointed day, perhaps a lot in your life will be pulled from the fire. They won't know why, but you will know. It was the covenant. It was the living promise. It was the quiet effect of a faithful soul. You, today, could be the reason for someone's silent salvation. You're not just the listener of the story. You are writing its next chapter. There are those who live quiet lives, whose names are never written in history, who never see the fruit of faith bloom while they are alive. They pray for their children and grandchildren, live upright in a chaotic time, obey God's law in silence, and then pass away as if nothing ever happened. But if the death of the righteous is the end, then the covenant is fragile. And if God forgets, He is not worthy of our trust. Thankfully, God does not forget. And once the covenant is made, it does not die with the one who entered it. Abraham died. He never saw his people grow as numerous as the stars. Never saw his descendants inherit the promised land. Never knew that thousands of years later his name would be invoked in the prayers of all nations. But God remembered him. Not as humans remember, with nostalgia, emotion, and fading recollection, but as a living memory, a sacred marker written into the structure of the universe. Jubilees states clearly, "For the Lord remembered Abraham, so he brought Lot out from the midst of the destruction." Abraham was no longer there. He didn't intervene. He didn't utter a direct prayer for Lot, but the promise he had entered was still at work. That covenant didn't require its keeper to still be alive for God to keep his word. It lives in his memory. And God's memory is not like ours. It is action, destiny, and a decree that will be fulfilled at its appointed time. Are you living righteously in silence? Maybe no one understands, no one sees, but God knows. And the light from your life doesn't end when you close your eyes. It could be the reason 3 generations later, someone in your family is saved. The covenant is an unbroken chain of light. You are a link in it. When one keeper of the covenant dies, the light doesn't go out. It moves into God's memory, and from there, it lives forever. Pause for a moment. Think of someone close to you. Maybe your spouse, a child, a grandchild, a family member, someone who doesn't believe yet, who doesn't pray, who hasn't returned. Someone who resists or stays indifferent. But you love them. You haven't given up. You pray, and you continue to live rightly, even when it feels like no one sees, no one hears, no one responds. Now imagine, the very thing keeping them from falling into the abyss is the faith you still hold. We often think of faith as something personal, just between us and God. But the Book of Jubilees reveals something quite different. The faith of one person can become the reason someone else is saved, not because of teaching, not because of inspiration, but because God remembers. He remembers the faithful and acts on behalf of others, just as he remembered Abraham and saved Lot. Lot did not pray. He didn't prepare. He didn't realize the boundary had been crossed, but he survived because God remembered someone else. You may be that person right now. You haven't seen change, but perhaps the one you love is still standing, hasn't fallen, still has a chance, simply because you are still keeping the flame of faith in silence. Don't underestimate the life you're living. Don't diminish the value of a midnight prayer, a righteous decision when no one is watching, a moment of forgiveness when you had every right to be angry. God does not forget, and the one you love may still be alive because he is remembering you. Faith isn't just for the salvation of your soul. It is a lamp, illuminating a territory of darkness where others walk without knowing. Are you willing to keep the covenant, not for yourself, but for them? Are you willing to live like Abraham so that someone else, weak in faith, dim in spirit, unaware of the danger, might still be pulled from the abyss because you walked in the light? We grow up with a simple formula: do good, get rewarded; do bad, get punished. It's a basic, understandable, fair moral system. But Jubilees challenges us to think deeper. In the story of Sodom, Lot wasn't saved because he was good, but because God was keeping his promise to someone else. Lot was not Abraham. He didn't live by the law, didn't establish a covenant, didn't pass on the faith. He hesitated, feared, compromised. But when the angels arrived, they didn't assess whether he was good enough. They simply acted because the appointed time had come for the covenant to be fulfilled. Salvation was no longer a reward. It was the ripple effect of a faithful life. Abraham lived rightly, and the light from him reached even those who were unworthy, not because of his intervention, but because of his very existence in the sacred memory of God. The covenant, once established, doesn't only preserve the one who made it, it extends to those near its light. Just as someone standing near fire becomes warm, one who lives near the righteous is sheltered from heaven's wrath, and that overwhelms us, because it turns our understanding of being saved upside down. Not only the righteous are saved, some are pulled from destruction simply because they are a descendant, a friend, a companion, or a relative of one who lived rightly. Righteousness doesn't just save the lawkeeper. It becomes a source that overflows, reaching even wandering souls. Because the covenant isn't limited to the individual, it is a flowing current carrying memory, promises, and divine power. And if you are living rightly, you are not only preserving yourself, you are creating a circle of salvation that you may never fully understand. Salvation is not just a destination, it is the natural result of a faithful life remembered in heaven. Lot was saved from Sodom, but Sodom never left him. He walked out of the city, led by 2 angels through a fiery night. But it wasn't a triumphant escape. It was a retreat, a salvation delayed by hesitation, fear, and clinging. The angels told him to flee to the mountains. He asked to stay in a little town. They urged him to leave at once. He lingered, and his partner on the journey, unable to tear her gaze from the ashes behind, was turned into a pillar of salt. He lost his wife, his home, his familiar world. But the tragedy didn't end there. Lot didn't lead his family to a place of worship. He didn't rebuild a covenant life like Abraham. He hid in a cave, living quietly in fear, like a man who survived a nightmare he never woke up from. And in that dark place, his daughters, shaped by the values of their old city, committed the unthinkable. They got their father drunk, then lay with him to preserve their lineage. There were no prayers, no repentance, no divine awakening in that cave, only instinct, panic, and a twisted legacy. From those two daughters came Moab and Ammon, nations that would become enemies of Israel, enemies of the covenant. Lot was saved by another man's light, but he did not carry that light with him. The fire from Abraham reached him, but it wasn't enough to ignite a new life. He lived, but didn't lead. He was saved, but bore no holy fruit. Salvation reached his body, but not his soul. And that is the greatest tragedy of all, to be touched by grace, but not transformed by it. To be pulled from destruction, but live the rest of life in inner darkness. You may be saved by someone else's light, but will you keep that flame alive? Or will you fall into the gray zone where salvation is wasted and Sodom is reborn in the lives of those you leave behind? We often think, if someone is saved, it's because they were worthy, they were devout, they repented, they changed. But Lot's story shakes that belief. And Jubilees, with one simple verse, illuminates the most dazzling paradox in the history of salvation. For the Lord remembered Abraham, so he brought Lot out from the midst of the destruction. Jubilees 19:8. God didn't save Lot because he begged. Lot never pleaded for mercy. He had no desperate prayer. He was hesitant, clinging, confused. And then he was pulled out, rescued, alive. God saved him because he remembered someone else. It was Abraham, the one who walked rightly, who carried light through the darkness. The one who kept the covenant in every step, every tent, every altar. And that light was remembered in the heart of God. God's faithfulness isn't like ours. It doesn't respond to moods. It doesn't demand worthiness at every moment. God is faithful, even when man is not. He keeps his word, even when the one who benefits no longer deserves it. Because what he has signed is not based on human fluctuation, but on a covenant rooted in eternal memory. You may be preserved, not because you live rightly, but because someone once prayed for you in a time you've forgotten. A grandmother who has passed, a father who once lit a candle in secret, a friend who whispered your name in the night. And God heard, and he remembers. We may lose ourselves. Lot lost himself. His wife looked back. His daughters stepped into darkness. But God kept his word. Because God's faithfulness does not tremble at human weakness. It is anchored in his very being. And this is not to make you complacent, but to make you reverent. For if God has saved you, though you were unworthy, what will you do with that second chance? Will you keep wandering, or will you turn back and live like the one God remembered? Where are you in this sacred exchange? The covenant is not some distant concept locked in biblical history. It is a living stream, flowing through generations, through lands, through souls, and you, whether you know it or not, stand at a crossing point between light and darkness, between those who held the covenant before you and those who will be touched by it after you. So who are you? Are you Abraham, the one who lives rightly, not for self-gain, but for a promise that outlives you? The one who keeps the flame in silence, journeys through wilderness, and believes God is at work even when no results are seen? Or are you Lot, the one pulled from destruction not by merit, but by the lingering light of another? One who survives through another's faithfulness, but has yet to awaken and enter the covenant for yourself? Or worse, are you standing on the sidelines, neither living rightly nor receiving the light, just letting life slip by in a grey zone where Sodom and safety are no longer distinguishable? The story is not just about Lot, not just about Sodom, not just about one moment of salvation in the past. It is being written right now in your life. Are you the reason someone is being preserved from collapse? Or are you surviving because of the prayer of someone whose name you've forgotten? And if that's true, what will you do with this life? The covenant doesn't just ask you to believe, it invites you to take on a role, the keeper of the flame for another generation, the one who creates a circle of light for a soul about to fall, the one who lives as if every step is a response to a sacred promise. You are not just a side character in an ancient text. You are a link, a witness, a living memory that God may one day recall when it's time to save someone else. Who are you in this divine dialogue, and what role will you take when God remembers? There will be times you look around and see only darkness, a fractured family, a broken society, faith mocked. And you ask, is anyone still keeping the covenant? Is anyone still walking in the light? Then you look at yourself, alone, small, in a city sinking into spiritual oblivion, and you begin to wonder, does what I'm living even matter? But remember, the covenant doesn't need a crowd to survive. It only needs one person to be remembered. Abraham was not near Sodom. He had no weapons, no army, no plan to rescue Lot. He didn't even know Lot's exact condition. But he had this, a covenant remembered, and a life bright enough for God not to forget. When the time came, when Sodom's sins had reached their limit, when divine wrath was awakened, God did not look at the city. He looked to memory, and in that memory, Abraham still lived. The light from his life, from his altars, his prayers, his obedience in a foreign land, still burned. And because of that light, Lot, a man unworthy, was pulled from hellfire. We live in an age more like Sodom than we care to admit, but Jubilees shows us just one person keeping the covenant is enough to set salvation in motion. You may be that person. You don't need power, a title, or applause. Just keep obeying, praying, walking in faithfulness. You may never see the outcome. But in heaven, your covenant doesn't expire. It rests in God's memory as a command awaiting its day of fulfillment. And when the time comes, the one you've been praying for may be saved. The light has never truly gone out. It is only waiting for one person, an Abraham, to remember, to walk, to keep the fire, and to live not for themselves, but for someone else who might still have a chance to be pulled from ruin. You don't need to save the whole city. You just need to make sure the light within you doesn't go out. The Book of Jubilees wasn't written only for Moses. It was recorded for something far greater, to preserve the memory of the covenant, to ensure that what God had done with the patriarchs would not fade away with time, so that future generations would know that in the midst of dark days there were once people who lived rightly, and because of them an entire generation was saved. Moses did not live in Abraham's time, but he was entrusted with the story to carry that light into his own era. And he wrote it down, not as a historian, but as a bearer of sacred memory. Today you stand in that same place. You don't need to wait for an angel to appear. You don't need to witness an explosive miracle. You just need to recognize the covenant is not dead. It's simply waiting for someone to live rightly so it can blaze again. Every time you forgive when you have the right to be angry, every time you pray when the world is silent, every time you walk in righteousness while others compromise, you are reviving a covenant that was established long ago. You may think your life is too small to make a difference, but look again at Abraham. He lived in tents, had no fortress, no nation, no organizational structure. Yet from him a wave of salvation flowed, even to those who did not walk as he did. If you live rightly, that covenant will live again through you, not only so you may be saved, but so that someone else, a friend, a child, a lost soul, may be pulled from the wreckage of their life. Not because they deserve it, but because you dared to step into the territory of faithfulness. You are not just a reader of a memory, you are becoming part of the next memory. One God may remember one day to save someone else. The covenant is waiting for a flame keeper, for someone willing to live rightly, and perhaps today that someone is you. At some point in life, every one of us will have to take a position. No one stands outside the story of salvation. No one is truly neutral. You are either the one keeping the light or the one living off the last flicker of someone else's flame. You might be the Abraham of this generation, the one still praying when no one believes in prayer anymore, the one keeping the covenant in a directionless generation, the one walking through the wilderness of life, not because of visible results, but because you believe that God still remembers. You may be living in silence, but your life is being remembered. And somewhere, someone may be preserved from ruin because you're still keeping the fire alive. But it's also possible that you are Lot, the one just pulled out of Sodom, but not yet fully awake. The one dragged out of darkness, but still looking back. The one who's been saved, but doesn't understand why. You're alive, but not yet living in the light. Your body is out of the fire, but your soul still sleeps in the shadows. And the most frightening thing is not the fire. It's when the fire is gone, but the heart remains cold. When the covenant door has opened, but the rescued soul still stands outside, unwilling to enter. Don't let that happen to you. If you are Abraham, keep the fire burning. Don't wait for applause. Don't wait to see the results. The covenant doesn't need a spotlight. It needs a faithful heart. And the light from your life could be the reason someone else is quietly saved. If you are Lot, don't just survive. Wake up. Step out of the cave of panic. Rebuild the altar. Let the light that reached you reach deeper into your soul, into your decisions, into the life you still have. Because this story isn't over, and you, today, are a living part of the covenant that is still being written. Close your eyes for a moment. Are you praying for someone, a loved one, A friend, someone you once cherished but who's now far away. A child who's wandered. A husband, a wife whose faith has grown cold. Or maybe someone in your city, a place that's slowly becoming a modern Sodom. In the ancient story, God remembered Abraham, and because of him, he saved Lot. Lot didn't plead. He didn't even know he was on the edge. But someone had lived rightly, had kept the covenant, had walked in the light, and because of that, he was pulled from destruction. Today, you stand in that role, and the person you're quietly praying for may still be alive, not fully fallen, because God is remembering you. Say their name, you don't need to shout, but call their name out from the silence. Write their name on your heart. Write it in the comment section, not because we need to know, but so you can affirm what you're carrying. A name is a living prayer. Don't think it's a small act, because in heaven, every cry is recorded, and the covenant, when remembered by a faithful heart, can rekindle a light that once seemed extinguished in someone else's life. You don't need to change the whole world, but you can keep one person from the fire simply by continuing to live rightly and by never stopping your prayer for them. Because one day, when they are pulled from the abyss, they may not know why. But God will know, and you will know that they survived because He remembered you. Leave the name of the one you're asking God to remember so we can pray together. Keep the covenant together and keep writing a story that never ends. Amen.